Hi, this presentation basically covers the introduction to Agile Part 1. So the agenda for the day is we will be discussing about what is Scrum, and then we will also see how to write effective user stories. So before I talk of Scrum, I would like to emphasize the importance of this Agile methodology. Most of the projects in the multinational companies across the globe is executed using agile methodology. So an undergraduate student, after completing 4 years of study in the college or the university, joins an organization, it becomes even more important for the graduate to have understood the concept of an agile methodology so that he stands out from the rest of his peer group. With that in mind, we have introduced the concept of agile methodology in the university level for the undergraduate students in the sixth semester by offering a program course called software engineering, and students are expected to do a project using the agile methodology. So once the student joins the company after his 4 years of study at Amrita, we are very sure, after receiving suitable feedback from the alumni saying that they always have an edge over and above the other peer group from other colleges or universities. So that is why I thought I would probably post an introductory video on agile methodology, and this is the part 1 of the video. The part 2 of the video will follow soon. So if you look into the agile methodology, the Scrum is the base. So how do you define a Scrum? Scrum is delivering the highest business value in the shortest span of time. So I'm going to do things in a fast pace, in an iterative mode, where I would get an actual working software every 2 weeks to 1 month. If I have a set of requirements and if I have to probably give an actual working software every 2 to 4 weeks time, then obviously there comes the point where I need to set the priorities. Once I set the priorities for the requirements, when I start off with the project team needs to be self-organizing in nature, in the sense that I do not want an external force to motivate my team to deliver. So the team will self-organize itself and deliver the highest priority features every 2 to 4 weeks. So every 2 to 4 weeks, I will see a real working software, and this is basically to make sure that the project is on track. So to emphasize the importance of Scrum, the Scrum has been used by majority of the multinational companies across the globe, right from Microsoft to Yahoo to Google to Philips, Siemens, Nokia, Intuit, Time Warner, John Deere, and so on. If you look at the kind of applications that can be developed using Scrum, you have all different kinds of applications, right from the top to the bottom, from the commercial software to the in-house development to embedded systems, gaming, websites, mobile phones, network switching applications, and almost many large applications in use have been developed using Scrum. So what are the characteristics of Scrum? The team needs to be self-organizing in nature, I've told you. The Product progress is going to be in a series of month-long sprint. The requirements of the project are captured in what is called a product backlog. In a Scrum, the advantage is there are no specific engineering practices prescribed. And Scrum uses a set of generative rules to create an agile environment and to deliver the project. So the Agile Manifesto is a set of values, a statement of values, and there are 4 key Agile manifestos. It says individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. This is what is called the statement of values or the Agile Manifesto. So what is a Scrum? So I have a product backlog. High priority items are moved from the product backlog into the sprint backlog. Then I have a 2 to 4 week sprint. I have a daily Scrum meeting every 24 hours, and at the end of 2 to 4 weeks I will get a potentially shippable product increment. So if you put all of these things together, so it says the product backlog, which is a bigger bucket, a smaller bucket is the sprint backlog, then I have the actual sprint and I get a shippable product at the end of 2 to 4 weeks time. So what is a sprint? A Scrum project makes progress in a series of sprints, and the sprint duration is 2 to 4 weeks or a calendar month, and it cannot exceed a calendar month at any point of time. This constant duration basically leads to a better rhythm. So during the sprint, the product is designed, coded, and tested, and these are things possible only if you have a self-organizing team and a cross-functional team. By a cross-functional team, we mean a designer, a programmer, and a tester. All of these people need to be a part of that team, and only then it is possible to probably get a potentially shippable product at the end of every sprint that spans for about 2 to 4 weeks time. So the agile methodology basically follows what is called an overlapping development. It is not sequential, and agile very clearly says rather than doing all of one thing at a time, you do a little of everything all the time. This puts what a Scrum is in a sentence. So since once you start off with the sprint and the sprint duration is going to be a couple of weeks or maximum 4 weeks time, so no changes are entertained during a sprint. So how to probably execute your project on the agile mode? You can try executing your project, the BTech project, in the final semester also using this agile mode. And mind you, it's going to be very, very effective. So the very first baby step in executing a project on the agile mode is to write an effective user story. A user story is another term for a requirement. So what is a user story? A user story combines the strength of the written and verbal communication, and if possible, you can support it by a picture. Because you know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, you can use a picture to support it. If not, ignore. This is not mandatory. So a user story is a concise written description of a piece of functionality that is going to be valuable to the user and the owner of the software. So they will state the user's needs, they will have the product description, the planning items, and so on and so forth. So there are three key aspects in a user story. It is a written description of the story used for planning. The conversations about the story that will serve to fill out details. It tests that convey and document details, and they can be used to find out if a story is complete or not. And user stories definitely represent functionality that will be valued by the users. So you can either write a good user story or you can write a bad one. A good user story might be written as a user can search for jobs, or a company can post new jobs, and so forth, so on. A bad user story could be written as the software will be written in C++, or the program will connect to a database through a connection pool. These are some ways of writing good and bad user stories, and obviously we all choose to write good user stories. So how to write is what we are going to see in the further slides or the video. So the first thing is you need to size stories. Stories cannot be too broad. It will be impossible to test our code. The story cannot be too narrow as well, because you will spend more time writing the specifications rather than implementing. So all big stories will be broken down into smaller pieces, and main objective of writing user stories is keep in mind that you will code and test in 2 to 4 weeks and then come up with a deliverable and so on. So the key point is, we cannot be too over ambitious here. So the customer writes stories. It's written in a language of business to allow prioritization. The customer is the primary product visionary. So good user stories need to satisfy certain things, and in short we call it as invest, INVEST. I is independent, N is negotiable, V is valuable, E is estimatable, S is small, and T is testable. So when I say independent, user stories need to be as independent as possible, and it is negotiable. Definitely it is not a contract, and it definitely should be valuable to the user, the owner, and all stakeholders. And definitely it should be estimatable, and it should be small, neither too not small nor too big, and it should be testable. So you cannot write it too subjective in nature. If you write it too subjective, then it's going to be difficult to test. So when I say independent, stories that depend on other stories are difficult to prioritize and estimate. Then negotiable, definitely story cards serve as reminders and they are not contracts. It should be valuable for those using the software, those paying for the software. So do not probably focus only on the developer. So a simple example says, instead of writing all connections to the database or through a connection pool, I can rephrase and write like this. Up to 50 users should be able to use the application with a 5-user database license. This sounds good and better than the previous one. Estimatable. Why estimatable might be difficult? There are 3 common reasons. Developers might lack domain knowledge. Then you should get the details from the customer. If the developers lack technical knowledge, please do knowledge sharing. And if the story is too big, split the story into smaller ones. Simple solution to make estimatable user stories. Definitely it should be small. Split compound and complex stories into simpler ones. Combine 2 small stories into one manageable chunk. So you can split stories, compound and complex stories can be split into smaller ones. So make sure that each split off portion is going to be a good story as well. So it should be testable. So aim for most tests to be automatable, and this is very important. And only if you could write automated test suites, it is beneficial, because manual test suites will always have higher probability of errors. So it is highly recommended that you write automated test scripts and make testing as automated as possible. So if you look at story responsibilities, developers have certain responsibilities. Developers will help customers write user stories that satisfy the invest criteria, and they will obviously strike conversation with the customer. If you look at story responsibilities from the side of the customers will write user stories that satisfy the invest criteria again, and they will strike conversation with the developer. So to put in very simple terms, I would say conversation, communication are two key things to make Agile successful. So if you look into the user category, there could be definitely more than one type of users. So whenever you write user stories, you also need to keep in mind what we call it as the disfavored users. Something like a disgruntled employee who would be a hacker from the inside. So you always need to take them also into account. So, how to write good user stories? There are certain guidelines. You start with your goal and always write closed stories. You cannot leave it open ended. So, size your story appropriately, because there is a fixed and rigid time frame for the sprint. As long as possible, keep the user interface out and write for a single user, and you need to write it in active voice. So whenever you write user stories, always remember user stories are not use cases or scenarios or requirements documents. Yeah. So user stories are something that conveys information and passes information in a correct manner between the customer and the developer and other stakeholders. So keep in mind these things whenever you write user stories. So what purpose does user stories serve? Definitely they emphasize verbal communication, and it should be comprehensible, understandable by everybody, work on an iterative development, and encourage participatory design. So after you have written all user stories, the next step is prioritization, because all of the user stories that you write go into what is called a product backlog. I have mentioned is a bigger bucket, so you will not be able to pull out all items from the bigger bucket in 2 to 4 weeks time. So I am probably trying to transfer a few items from the bigger bucket into a smaller bucket, and the smaller bucket is termed as the sprint backlog. So which items to move from the product backlog to the sprint backlog will be basically decided on what is called prioritization. Means higher priority items will be moved first from the product backlog into the sprint backlog. So what you need to typically work on is, if I have a bigger elephant, I try to make 4 smaller ones, and then try to make another 12 still smaller ones. And the bigger elephant might be an epic, the 4 smaller elephants might be even user stories, and the 12 still smaller elephants could even be tasks. These are the 3 key terms you would obviously come into contact whenever you probably read the concept of agile. So a simple example is given. So as a user, I want to reserve a hotel room. As a user, I want to cancel a reservation and so on. Could be some of the user stories that you could probably write. So where are the details? As a user, I can cancel a reservation. So if I cancel, will I get a full refund? Will I get a partial refund? Will the refund go into my credit card, or is it going to be a side credit? Can I cancel the room at any point of time? Are the rules common for everybody, or do you have any special rule for frequent travelers? How do you send a confirmation to the user after the cancellation, and so on? All these details are definitely required whenever you go for the implementation. So details as conditions of satisfaction. You can do it. So you can write verify that a premium member can cancel the same day without a fee. A non-premium member can be charged about 10% for the same day cancellation, and so on and so forth. These are some samples. You can write more as well. So details added in smaller sub-stories is what I want to probably drive in here. So you have a project. I have features, stories, and tasks. The features are called the epics. So we normally keep on interchanging and using features, epics, and both will mean the same thing. So you have a feature or an epic, then you have a user story, and below which you have a task. And this is the general flow for a project. So a simple example is given here. For example, an epic could be user authentication. User stories could be some user login screen, forgot password, lock account after too many failed attempts, or do you want a login support using Google or Facebook? These are more generic, so I move on to subtasks. For example, if it is a user login screen, you design a login page, have icons and images, write the page using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, write SQL queries, and so on and so forth. And you can have engineering tasks like set up a GitHub project repository, an AWS, which is an Amazon Web Service account, set up Jenkins, probably that will be used for the continuous integration pipeline, and so forth, so on, right? So to quickly summarize what we have seen now, user stories combine written and verbal communication, and you can support it with a picture if possible. User stories should describe features that are valuable to the user. So you should give enough of information, no more, no less. Details are deferred and captured through collaboration just in time for the development. And test cases should be written before development when the user story is written. Kindly note. And that is the job of a tester in the group. And all user stories need to satisfy what is called the invest, right? Independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small, and testable. So where to go next after this? These are some of the sites. Probably you can go and refer. A lot of material on Agile is available, and what I have given you is just a pinch of salt. And this is a Scrum reading list. You can probably go through this as well. Yeah. So thank you, and this ends the introduction to Agile Part 1 video, and I will come up with the Agile Part 2 video shortly. Thank you once again.